who's frustratingly staring at my screen saying, press the button. Sorry for that. Okay, so we'll just go back to this title slide. So hopefully there'll be some new insight in here anyway. And you know, we'll kind of cover, ways in which schools are quite often not meeting that first benchmark and ways in which we can help you to do that. By the end of this session, you hopefully will be able to understand the scope of the first benchmark. And it's only really actually when planning this session that I've realised really the scope of it, the size of it, the kind of ambition that there is just tied up in that first benchmark alone. I want you to be aware of how well-structured policy can be clear to defining what you want to achieve in that first benchmark. So I'm sure you've all got careers policies in place, but actually a really perfect careers policy, a really strong careers policy, it clearly defines exactly what you want to get out of the programme, and it's really important. And then also I'm going to encourage you to find some quick wins to attaining 100% on that first Gatsby benchmark if you haven't done already. I failed to give you an introduction at the beginning. I know I spoke to many of you a couple of weeks ago, but my main role at Complete Careers is an assessor for the Quality and Careers Standard Award. So I'm a careers advisor as well. I go into schools, but one of my main remits is to actually assess schools for what is working well and what's not working so well. And in that, I do quite a lot of consultancy, but also I speak to a lot of schools who are considering working towards the standard. So I have quite a good understanding of what does work at different schools and where schools are just kind of maybe not quite failing to hit the criteria. I think when it comes to aspects of the first benchmark, which we're going to discuss, there are elements of kind of jumping through hoops to a degree in order to achieve some of these things. It's not necessarily all about the quality, it's about making sure things are in place. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So if you could just pop into the chat now, I know there's only a few of you, are you 100% in Gatsby Benchmark 1? So when you do your Compass report, if indeed Compass assessment, are you getting 100% in that first Gatsby benchmark? If yes, can you let me know roughly when you achieved it? If no, that's fine, just say no. Or if you actually know the percentage that you're working towards it, that would be absolutely great. So if you could pop that in the chat while I keep chatting. It's my sense that actually a lot of schools who've got very, very good careers provision don't necessarily manage to hit every single element of that first Gatsby benchmark. And this is really, really common. And similarly, and I will have said this before, I know, similarly, schools can seem to achieve the first Gatsby benchmark very, very well and get 100% in that, but actually the rest of their careers provision doesn't unfortunately necessarily match up to it. Okay, we've got Rise Home, no, we are 100% capitals, that's great. Okay, so we've got some that are and some that aren't. Okay, so achieving 100% across that benchmark is not necessarily easy to do, but some schools are doing it and some schools aren't. As I say, the level of their provision isn't always follow. Phil, you've got 80%. Right.
Yeah. I think just as well to add on that as well, Jenny, is one of the reasons why we put this session on is because as a careers hub across the whole of Greater Lincolnshire, we know that Gatsby Benchmark 1 is a challenge. You know, for example, the schools that I'm currently work with, on average, those schools are only scoring 83% on Benchmark 1. You know, so that's an area that we wanted to try and support you with in terms of putting this session on. So we know that it is one that sometimes schools have and colleges have some difficulty with. So just a bit of extra context there for you.
Thank you, Alex. That's brilliant. Yeah. Right. So some of you are, some of you aren't. Most schools are getting, I should say at this point, you know, whereas with other benchmarks, they may be getting 30, 40%, particularly if it's employer engagement and that kind of thing. And most people most schools I find are in the 80s if they haven't completed it already. They're getting a high level, but they're not quite there. So that's why the latter part of this session is really about some of those quick wins that can really help you if you're just almost there, but not quite. What I've done here actually is I've printed off kind of basically the narrative that goes with your Compass evaluation. So when it won't look like this. When you complete the Compass evaluation, this is what you're going to see. And so it's a really good indication of actually what in terms of achieving 100% on Compass, what is it they're looking for. And just to read that first bit, these questions are about the Gatsby benchmark for a stable careers programme. Schools and colleges should have an established programme of careers education and guidance that is known and understood by students, parents, teachers, governors and employers. So that is the understanding of what achieving that first benchmark is, but then what does that actually mean? If in terms of you actually meeting that benchmark, you have to be able to say, does your school have the careers programme that is written down, that is approved by the Board of Governors, that has the explicit backing of senior leadership, that has resources and funding allocated to it, that is regularly monitored, that has both strategic and operational elements? And then, does your school publish its careers programme on its website? Next, is there any information on your website about the careers programme aimed specifically at students, teachers, employers, parents, carers? And next, does your student evaluate the effectiveness of its career programme at least every 3 years? Does the evaluation of your careers programme take into account feedback from students, teachers, employers, parents, carers? And you have a lead person with strategic responsibility for it. So those are the different questions. And what I've done is highlighted in red here some of the kind of questions this immediately brings up in my mind when I look at Compass. And when I look at the Compass results of lots of schools who are working towards the quality and career standard, it's often really clear the areas that they are failing on and not managing to get as effectively met. And that tends to be on things such as the information being disseminated to learners and to teachers, to employers and to parents and carers. I'd say that's a major area that schools don't seem to quite be able to reach, which I can understand. And I think also perhaps something around the evaluation of the careers programme, making sure that evaluation is really talking to all those or assessing the impact to all those stakeholders. So I think it's about that, both those categories that referenced students, teachers, employers, parents and carers. And it can be a little bit frustrating as an external person, because at the end of the day, the careers programme and the quality of it is so important, and yet quite a lot of kind of focus is put on, whether, your information on your website, for example, is aimed at teachers. And we can talk a little bit more about the value of how valuable that is compared to perhaps some of the other value that can be seen throughout the benchmarks. So I've just grabbed out, I'm an English graduate, so that's my background. So it's my nature to always kind of look at the language quite closely. So I've taken a little sort of extract there from a poem, and I've taken some of the key words that I've highlighted in the previous slide. So, for example, things like explicit backing. Your careers policy or the programme, it says, must have explicit backing from the senior leadership team. Now, what does explicit backing mean? Does it mean that they've looked at it? Does it mean that they've helped write it? Does it mean they agree on it? Does it mean that they are aware of the extent to which they need to have difficult conversations around it, for example? So the fact that a senior leader might need to talk to the head of maths who's reluctant to let students out of their lesson for careers interviews, or talk to the head of English about making sure there's curriculum links, or tutors potentially who aren't delivering PSHE in Key Stage 3 in a careers format. What does that backing mean? Yes, we know what it can look like. Is it one meeting is it them seeing the careers policy, or is it them really having that authority and kind of like advocacy for what's going on in careers? Resources and funding, I mean, that's a very unusual one. We could go forever with this. It says that it must have resources and funding allocated to it, but no stipulation about what that is. Is funding a £100 a year budget, like some schools seem to have, very little, and other schools have 20, 30, 40,000 budgets in order to pay for huge amounts of guidance and using platforms, work experience, etc. Is it regularly monitored? Now, what is regular? I mean, this is a reference to how often the policy is monitored rather than the provision, but how often is regularly? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Evaluate the effectiveness of the programme. Again, it's just a little bit vague, isn't it? What do we mean about the effectiveness there and evaluating that? And that is something we're going to talk about in quite a lot of detail. And then we're thinking about those teachers and parents and carers, not only thinking about the policy being in place and the careers programme being in place and it being well organised and well managed, but also being communicated and other stakeholders being brought in. So if we think about that, and if you think about Compass in terms of that initial page with that first Gatsby benchmark, it always struck me that there's something really important missing, which is what the programme actually is. So we talk a lot about the policy, we talk a lot about the programme, but what actually does that mean and what actually is it? And I suppose if you think about Gatsby Benchmark 1, it is a little bit about putting the cart before the horse, because it's saying this programme has to take place, but it's not really detailing why and what it actually involves. What does it actually look like? Which is, again, why schools can meet that initial benchmark sometimes quite well without actually having necessarily much in place. But what you need to be thinking about here is, oh, have I gone back a slide? Sorry, I've gone. Right. I do apologise, I've got a slide missing. But what I want to talk to you a little bit now is the DfE guidance, or the Gatsby report guidance, which came out, which suggested, and I'll add this slide in later, so don't worry about it, that really what we're talking about is that careers programme, what it looks like. In the Gatsby report, and you don't know much about Gatsby, but in the research that took place, they spent a lot of time in Northern Europe and a lot of time in Canada. And in certain countries there, they had, well, certain in regions, I should say, educational regions within those countries, they had they saw evidence basically of careers provision or careers curriculums being very much structured and in place. So if you lived in England or you lived in Lincolnshire, there was a very set careers programme curriculum basically. And the DfE and Gatsby agreed that actually that wasn't appropriate, that actually what would be better is for schools to come up individually with their own careers programme, what that might look like. This is that one size does not fit all. What the DfE and Gatsby have said is that really schools should be developing their own curriculum guidelines, but then how can we do that? So I've just had a look here at the different ways in which you can develop that programme and what it looks like. So using things like frameworks, you'll know a little bit about the CDI framework. This is the main sort of what a professional body which is assimilated to careers professionals, and they come up with their own educational framework, which we're going to show you in a moment about what good careers should look like. So your careers policy or your programme should really be around something like the CDI framework. Some schools reference the PSHE framework, and some schools will also reference Gatsby within their schemes of work, their programme, their lessons, but the detail really isn't there. And if you're looking at what you actually want the learners to achieve and what you want them to learn, the CDI framework is a really good place to start. The other ways in which you can develop your curriculum is, or your programme is around using professionals. So using careers advisors if you have access to one, using career learning specialists. It wasn't long ago that there were a lot of individuals working in local authority who were basically career learning specialists who could tell you what careers should look like in school and how a programme should be developed. And they're still out there and they're still able to give you some of their expertise. You can look at online forums. You can contact organisations like ours. You could be using employers. So some schools do this to a very, very high degree. Now, obviously, this is exactly the remit that Alex is got in terms of supporting you. Think about what your curriculum should look like by talking to employers. Not only what do they need from your students in terms of who's going to make a good worker in their workforce in 3 or 4 years' time, but also what they can offer, what can they give you, particularly in terms of those other benchmarks. You can use things like your governing body. Very often your governing body, their employers themselves, they may wish to get involved. Your link governor might wish to inform the programme, or even your alumni could feed back sometimes and think, okay, this is what I think would be useful for you to have. This is what I wish I had had. And then you can think about using third parties as well. So there are some great resources online. Obviously, you've got the Careers Leader Facebook group. You've got the Barclays Skills resources, which are really, really good, which give you an idea of what a careers programme could look like, or some content for it, if not the entire programme. BBC Bite Size. And then increasingly organisations like QDOS and Unifrog are actually developing really quite specific, niche, detailed guidance to how you can create a careers programme around some of the resources that they've got on there online. And then I've put Link Hire in there just because recently the Complete Careers has done a project for them creating and designing some resources. And sometimes there are basically organisations out there which are tasked, just like we've been recently, with creating a bank of resources, creating a bank of lessons. And so your curriculum can really be based upon all these different kinds of things. I've just put there the 6 learning areas of the Gatsby framework. So when you're thinking about of the CDI framework, when you're thinking about hitting that first Gatsby benchmark, you need to be making sure that your programme is allowing your learners to do these key 6 things, the 6 key things, which is grow throughout life, explore possibilities, manage their career, create opportunities, balance life and work, and see the bigger picture. Now, careers is something that, if you think back to your own personal experience of careers support has evolved hugely. And when you use something like the CDI framework, it is really on the cutting edge here of what we think young people should be supported with. So as you can see, there's very much an emphasis on lifelong learning, managing your career throughout your life, being proactive and exploring opportunities, understanding how your working life fits into your wider life, and how to make opportunities for yourself. And if you really are thinking about your careers programme and starting it off, embedding these 6 key areas is a very, very good place to start. So next, if you could pop into the chat, who wrote your careers policy? Now, you may have been in post not too long, and therefore it might have been created before you were in post, but maybe you can write who typically reviews it or writes it. But if you can remember who originally wrote it, please put that in the chat now, because that's quite interesting to look at. Even in the last 4 years, the careers landscape has changed quite significantly since Gatsby, since the DfE guidance. And so it's worth thinking, okay, who wrote it? Are they somebody who should have written it? Did they write it well? Are they a careers expert? Do they have some help from a careers expert? Who wrote it? VP, checked it over, careers lead and senior team, great, lovely. Myself and previous careers leader, great. All right, lovely. But what is a bit of a shame to a degree, level 6, okay, brilliant. There's some level 6 qualified people feeding into that, which is really good, because that's sort of point I was hoping to make there, is that, you know, how we have come into a position where schools have got a huge amount of responsibility to hit the Gatsby benchmarks, but who is actually writing the careers policy? Is it somebody who knows anything about careers? And that's something that unfortunately is not always the case. Is it somebody who knows what career theories are? Is it somebody who knows about what good careers should look like? Now, it's fine if it's not, but it's important that whoever is doing it is at least receptive and open-minded and asking the right kind of questions about what a good careers program should look like. Thank you for your feedback there. Right. So I've looked at another way of structuring this, because I think this is the best way to understand that first Gatsby benchmark. Those are the 8 that I've got listed there, but really if we just add in these words, the whole thing for me just makes sense an awful lot more. So basically a stable careers program is that first benchmark, but really which includes, if you put that wording in there, then the following criteria are things that you need to have within that program. So there needs to be learning from career and labour market information, addressing the needs of each pupil, linking curriculum to careers, encounters with employers and employees, experience of workplaces, encounters with further and higher education, and personal guidance. And so your program is really about making sure that these elements are then within your wider program and within your reference within your policy. Okay, so I've had a little look at here some of the language around policy, and we're moving on to talk much more about policy now, and how that basically is going to help you achieve those benchmarks and to frame it and understand its place within the programme. So if we talk about a careers policy, we're talking about, just like any school has a policy, such as a safeguarding policy or a bullying policy. It's quite a formal and official document quite often. It's saying what should happen and what will happen and what you will do. Now, this can be quite a short document sometimes. It's not necessarily a very long document, but it is really about the statutory minimum, and it would reference things like the Baker Clause, your access arrangements, that kind of thing. I'm sure you'll all have a policy in place at the moment which will reference those kind of things. But some people's policies are really very basic when it comes to careers, and some people use their policy for a mechanism to do an awful lot more. And that's when they basically develop a policy into what is more like a program. So when we talk about the program is, okay, actually, what is actually happening in a more kind of more day-to-day kind of way, I suppose. What actually is happening? What activities are going on? And that leads you again into the sense of what is an entitlement statement. So an entitlement statement might be, okay, year 7 should have these 5 things happen. Year 8 should have these 5 things happen. It's much more about, okay, this learner should expect these things to happen within this frame of time. Then we've got the scheme of work, which, you know, again, can be evolved, something slightly separate, but can also be developed into a policy or weaved into a program. And that's basically what learning is due to take place. Now, that learning can include careers lessons, but it can include work experience, information evenings, assemblies. It can include personal guidance if necessary. And then finally, we've got the development plan. And the development plan is something a little bit different. This is, okay, what do I know needs improving in the school in terms of careers provision? What needs to be better? And so the development plan is really crucial to thinking, okay, over a certain period of time, for example, 2 years, what needs some addressing? And so those kind of 5 different terms, if you like, those 5 different kinds of documents, schools rarely have all 5 of them. There's more likely to be a merge of all of them. Sometimes a school's policy has a very large section, which is basically their entitlement statement. Sometimes the careers programme will form part of the policy. And so it's all kind of working out what documents you think your school needs. And I think thinking about really, I think the key documents, obviously a policy is essential, but the key documents are somewhere around that programme and entitlement statement, so that any learner in year 7 could pick up that document and understand exactly what is going to happen to them over the course of the next 5, if not 7 years of education. So what is actually going to happen? And there's a lot of emphasis, again, when we talk about language now, on this stable careers programme. And again, it's sort of ironic to talk about a stable careers programme at a time when most schools didn't really have an effective careers programme at all. So stability, and Gatsby actually make sure they stress this, is not about things standing still. It's not about things not changing. It's about things evolving a great deal. And as an assessor for the award, I'd much rather go into a school and see a very unstable, brand new, reworked programme that was very effective than a very stable careers programme that had remained the same for 10 years but wasn't really moving with the times and or moving with the kind of evaluation processes that were going on. So stability is important. Yes, we want to think these programmes will have longevity, but at the same time, being inventive is also really crucial. And I suppose that brings us down to one of the final, the key elements, I suppose, about the Gatsby one, is that it's about having things structured in such a way that any individual could leave the school, the careers leader, the careers coordinator, the careers advisor, and the things would still be in place, things would still happen, careers lessons would still be being delivered, work experience would still happen, guidance would still be being offered. And so it's very much about that structure being in place, which allows for all that to continue. I've got a couple of slides here, which is to give you a bit of a guide for creating your careers policy or reviewing your careers policy, which some of you might be doing at the moment. And again, my colleague wrote this slide, but it's very much about what you were hearing about last week, which is that intent and implementation and then impact. So within a careers policy, you'd normally have an introduction of basically what the policy is, and including any documents such as the careers programme or entitlement that you might be adding to it. You'd have a description of the organisation, so kind of summing up what the organisation is, and basically as well what your school feels about careers. What's their attitude to careers? Is it part of your whole school development plan? I would say the schools that do careers best are schools of which, there is a real collective drive to improve social mobility, for example. And so the whole school is speaking from exactly the same hymn sheet, if you like, in terms of talking about why good careers is important. The aims and outcomes of the policy have to be there, referencing, sort of the importance of that impartial career support for learners, and referencing things like Gatsby and statutory guidance. You put details of the curriculum there, so what actually is going on, so what is happening, including methodology, assessment, recording and reporting, monitoring, reviewing, evaluating, resources, information, advice and guidance. So that is that detail of that entitlement, what is actually going on, and including things like, your staff development and the levels of staff qualifications, who's in the team, what does the team look like. We've got here a description of the role of the CIG coordinator leader, what are their responsibilities. I quite like to see at this point, what is their other responsibilities as well? Are they have a huge teaching remit as well? Are they a safeguarding lead? Next, we've got details of the system that's both clear to learners and staff about how controversial issues are sometimes dealt with. So, for example, you might have issues around a student's destinations, perhaps even parental concerns. The role and contribution of partners to supporting CIAG, so that's really important that you perhaps put in who if it's external, is offering your guidance, the support you get from the LEP or from Link Higher, or support you get from any external agencies. How the careers provision is going to be monitored, reviewed and evaluated. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit more in a moment. Action plans are rating to quality awards, so you might want to include in that, okay, I know that these areas need improving, so it might not just be in relation to a quality award, it could be in relation to those kind of that careers development plan we were talking about. Is there a development plan? Is there a push forward for improvement, and where is that mentioned? List of other related policies, and then details for the process of consultation, dissemination and review of the policy. And these are the bits we're going to be focusing on just now. So a bit like the sort of slide I was giving you a little while ago about that stable careers program, this is really Gatsby 1. This is this first benchmark, but then the other benchmarks sit underneath it, with the learner there being really key. And we've got the intent. So your careers program, Gatsby 1, is what you intend to do, what you're intending the learners to have. Those other 7 Gatsby benchmarks are the implementation, so what actually is happening. But then the only way to assess impact is by understanding the learner and what has actually made it through to them. And this is where careers provision sometimes is falling down, that it can seem that the Gatsby 1 is being achieved fairly well. The second level there, in terms of the actual details of the programme, some of that is being delivered quite well, but it's only when speaking with the learner that you really assess the impact of what's gone on. Just another one to put in your chat now. If you could identify one thing that would improve your programme, what would it be? I'm quite curious to hear from you about what do you think is the one thing that could happen that would make a big difference to what you could provide in your schools. I can imagine quite a few schools would say. And it's worth saying at this point that one of the things I do when I talk to schools, when I support them to review their programme, is we listen to them as well in terms of what they think they need to improve on, or what they need in order to create an improved programme. Because very often you, as the individuals within the school and having the strongest level of oversight in terms of careers, you know what needs improving and you know what it is that needs to happen in order for that to improve. But if you could put anything in chat now, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll go to Alex and say, I don't know whether Alex has got any sense of what do you think schools most frequently want? Okay, buy-in from all staff. I couldn't agree with you more, Phil. I think if everybody is supporting the agenda, which I do see occasionally in schools, it's a game changer in terms of careers. Sorry, Alex, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of reflect on a recent experience I've had with one of my special educational needs settings, and I actually almost think going through the process of, because they were scoring quite low on Gatsby Benchmark 1, so they were kind of starting from afresh, but going through the whole process, which has taken a bit of time, has actually given them such a great platform now to kick on with everything else. And coming back to your point, Phil, because they've more or less started from afresh, so they've come up with their own new vision for careers, what they want it to be. They're kind of structuring it around the word journey, because I think that's more appropriate for them than the word careers. But they've come up with their own vision. They've asked, for comments from employers on what that vision should be. They've asked for senior leadership input. So all of a sudden, because lots of people are having a say in what this vision should be, people start becoming more interested and want to be more involved because they're having their input in it. So I'm not saying that everyone is in the position to go and start afresh and as such, but just by stopping and reflecting and actually going through the process of, well, actually, what do we want our careers provision to provide our learners? And what do we want that kind of, that vision to be for our school? That sometimes and going through that process over a longer period and getting people to buy in, to input into it, is actually a really good process to get that buy-in from all staff as well. So again, if you are a relatively new careers leader, or even if you're experienced and you feel that you've been running the same program as you have done for a certain period of time, it might be something to consider to almost rebrand your provision. There's no reason why you couldn't go about it that way to help you try and get more people involved in it, and almost rebrand it, almost think of it as its own business as such, because that's ultimately, in the school, the careers is often fighting against lots of other curriculum areas. So if you can rebrand it and relaunch it and make a big bang with it as such, you can often get lots of people more involved with and engaged with it. So
Alex, so sorry, go on, finish.
It is a really common thing, and it's something that we really, we do hear a lot of that from all the schools that we work with, about buy-in from senior staff and things like that. What I would suggest is sometimes the careers leader is often one person, and it's about how do you try and get people on your team as such that are really invested in the things that you're doing. Trying to get a link governor that's responsible for careers at your side. You're influencing them for when they go to their governors meetings to talk about careers in more depth. maybe there's a good subject teacher that you can bring involved. Maybe there's a group of students that you want to get on your team as well. And all of a sudden, you've got this mini army around you that allows you to do more things because you're a bigger voice than just the one person as such. So
brilliant. Absolutely, Alex. And I think it's interesting there that talking about buy-in from all staff that Phil talks about, like that might be, like I said earlier, the buy-in from the maths teacher who doesn't mind the students going out for careers interviews and doesn't make a big deal of it. Or it could be the tutors who maybe aren't delivering careers very well. So that buy-in there, but also then the buy-in which I think someone else has put just underneath, which is the buy-in from actually the leadership team. So, careers is something, I guess the best way to say it, this is kind of off-piste in a way, is careers is something you have to care about. Clearly, as careers professionals, I really, really care about, but it's very hard to get people really passionate about it. Some people think it sort of sits behind something you've kind of got to do, a bit like elements of PSHE or safeguarding, which they don't necessarily feel enthused about. So actually that kind of hearts and minds winning is really key. And I am going to be talking about that a little bit more next week when we talk about Gatsby 4. But I would strongly consider that you do things, for example, when it comes to careers, like getting external speakers to come, that your careers advisor might run some inset training. Someone like an organisation like ours would potentially run inset training. You could run inset training about why careers is important. One of the hooks that I've often found works quite well is talking to the teachers in the school and the leadership about their experience of careers and their own experience of their own career, their own experience of the kind of support that they got when they were younger. And also some of the ridiculous narratives that we have around careers. It can be something that is quite fun to play with as a concept. And obviously at heart, the whole purpose, or a large part of the purpose of education, is preparing young people for their future world of work. So it seems incredible that that careers has slipped to the point, certainly 4 or 5 years ago, where it wasn't at the forefront of everybody's minds. And it's getting there, but you're on the forefront of that, and it's a difficult game to convince. It was Rachel who said that. They said about time and money, and absolutely that's got to be one of the things. Greater awareness of and skills by the staff, more involvement within the curriculum. Some of the stuff that's worked incredibly well that I've seen is when schools have put in their development plan that each department has got to organise 2 external speakers per year. I mean, that's just great, taken care of. Just like Alex says, careers is not one person's responsibility, just like safeguarding is not one person's responsibility. It is everybody's responsibility, our moral responsibility really, to prepare young people for the future world. But with teachers who've got so many conflicting things and so much pressure on them in terms of achieving those grades, it can easily get kind of left behind. So when we're thinking about the policy, the programme, the entitlement statement, and I've kind of amalgamated those words there because it might be that your policy is quite brief, but your programme is what's more detailed. It might be that you have, as I say, a policy which has got all this information in it. But we need to think about consultation. How is it designed, developed and delivered? And this is what Alex is suggesting here. It's not a bad idea to go back to the staff if you could get a small inset opportunity to do it and say, what do you think good careers should look like? And actually put it out to them, because I think that really does help think about what careers. I think good career support is to some extent common sense, and it does certainly draw on your own experience very much, and allowing the staff to be more widely involved in actually how it's designed, developed and delivered can be really useful. Next, dissemination, how is it communicated and understood? So it's all right having that policy there, but is anybody ever reading it? And this is very, very key. The policy could be beautifully worded, but if no student has ever read it, if no parent has any idea it's on the website, if no member of staff even knows it exists, then what was the point of writing it? It's got to be something that is accessible. Even if it's not something that's completely read, it's got to be something that people know where it is and they can access it if they need it. And then when it comes to the programme, how is it assessed and its impact assured? So how can we tell that what is written in the policy, what is detailed in the programme, what is in the entitlement statement is actually happening and happening well and doing what you want it to do? And it's kind of basic, but it's so important. And I suppose what I would suggest is, if you think about the best way to understand this is perhaps think about your year 11s, and if you have a sixth form, additionally your year 13s. At the end of their careers journey, what do you want them to be like as individuals? Now, I don't mean what do you want them to be like, because they're all very individual. I mean, what kind of skills and qualities and what level of understanding do you want them to have before they go into the world of work? If you could pack them a suitcase with certain things in before they walk out that door, what would be in it. And I think you'd say things like confidence, high aspirations, realism, the ability to be confident and a good public speaker, the ability to write an application well, the ability to research careers online, a level of flexibility. You'd want them to be individuals who understood themselves really well and had a knowledge of the labour market. You'd want them to be people who are aspirational, who wanted to work hard, who are motivated. Think about all those kind of things that you want that in that suitcase. And really then it's a case of tracing backwards. How can you develop a programme that is allowing those learners to basically become effective career managers over the course of their time at your school? Now, if you think about that, it's enormous responsibility. And again, it cannot be placed on one person. And it's very, very ambitious. And so this first benchmark really is extremely ambitious in terms of, right, okay, you need to create a structure which is going to allow, thousands potentially of students to, over time, evolve into that kind of individual who's going to be successful when they hit the labour market. So if we think about who you could be talking about with the entitlement statement, you could be talking to all the staff. So as Alex says, you could create send out an email to everybody. Would you get many replies? Possibly not, but it's out there. You could be talking in a staff meeting in the morning if you have large scale staff meetings. Has anybody got any thoughts about the careers programme? I want to bring a group together to people to feed into it. You could be talking to learner voice. So I think one thing that is really useful in terms of learner voice is things like, we're actually going to talk about that in more detail later, but things like focus groups. You could be talking to partners, so have a talk with Alex about what makes a good careers provision, talk to your careers advisor or other people at the company you work with about what they think should feed into this statement. Obviously, you're at this very meeting now, which is helping you. Your other stakeholders as well are key there. So at schools, again, where careers is done extremely well, the employer links are so strong, the employers actually feed in quite strongly into what the careers programme should look like. In a school in South Yorkshire that I assessed, they'd gone a step further and the employers had fed in to the school programme what qualities or skills they felt that the learners should have, a bit like that suitcase, as they left school. And their whole award system was structured around that. So whether they got a house point or not was structured around whether they were showing those kind of work-ready skills. Now that's an extreme version, but having a talk with an employer about what is needed is really useful. So how can you do that? Well, you could use your student council, or you could use focus groups, which I may have talked about in a moment, but that's just as useful. Grab a group of year 9s, grab a group of year 11s, a group of year 13s, bring them together at lunchtime. Even during school time, it's important that they feed into what they think good careers should look like. Or use student council. Ask your link governor or someone from SLT to contact the governing body and put it as part of the agenda. Some ideas around what good careers could look like, see what they think. Then we've got the SLT meeting. Can you attend? If you are SLT already, obviously that's perfect. Talk about what good careers should look like at that level. Think about a learner survey. Then use your enterprise advisors. And as I said, discuss with local employers, use those frameworks, and basically call upon expertise. So call on people who know about careers professionals as well. And then eventually that will need to be signed off by SLT, the governors, or potentially even your MAT lead if you have one. So next, how is it disseminated? And this is really key. So schools can have these wonderful policies, these wonderful programs, these wonderful entitlement statements, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's not seen by anybody. It's not visual. So the main way in which all schools obviously have to do this is they put it online. So it's clear to access from the website. So if I want on any school's website, I should be able to find their careers policy and potentially alongside more detail there. But how else can you do it? Well, you could email it out to parents at the start of every year. There's a careers leader just to let you know, we've reviewed our careers policy and our careers programme. If you want to know what your son and daughter is going to experience over their time at your school, please have a look and read. Okay, it's a simple one to go out. You can send posters around school. Now, this involves a little bit of kind of manipulation, but I've known schools who've created exceptionally good kind of posters, basically imagery around their programme and around elements of their policy, actually specifically as well. And this is linking into what Alex said. It's very helpful for learners, it's very helpful for staff and for everybody if careers is branded in a way that it has a specific look or feel about it. Now, quite often that can be because it's got one very visible individual running it. So that is the careers person. When I see that person, I think careers, their careers. But you can also do it in another way. You can also do it in terms of a particular colour or poster. Or I've known schools who've contacted, the graphic design department in sixth form, well, not the art department, and asked the graphic design students to create a little careers imagery. And this imagery is used around schools on notice boards. It's specifically on the careers area of the website. It's appearing on little slides where there's careers across the curriculum. It's a big project, that, but it certainly would work over time in terms of making careers something very recognisable and distinct within the school. It can be brought on the screen in form time, tutor time. One of the things that all year 7 and all year 9 and all year 12 tutors need to do, for example, is review the careers policy with all the learners. That's a 10-minute task to do, and it can be brought up on the whiteboard at the front of the class. You could do an entitlement assembly. The careers leader could run an entitlement assembly, which basically outlines the more accessible bits of the policy and the careers programme, what the students can expect. I knew a school who had a lot of resources on their website. They had their policy and their programme, but also a lot of links, a lot of really helpful information. They'd spent a lot of time investing on their website. But as an assessor, I went there and said, well, is it accessed? Is it used? And actually what they did is they had QR codes based around the school where you could click on a QR code and it would take you to the relevant section of the careers website, which might have an apprenticeship area, for example, or a section on applying to university, which was designed by the sixth form team. And then I've known other schools who've put careers entitlement in planners, so it's existed somewhere. But you can do your best to bring it across. And I would argue that things like assemblies or asking tutors or making tutors kind of show it in form time, emailing out to parents is a really, really good way of making sure that it is disseminated, that people are seeing it. So then we're thinking about the evaluation of the policy. Now, it should be either yearly or 2 yearly that you review your policy. When you're reviewing your policy, you need to understand the changes in your statutory duties. So as new guidance is coming out, obviously it needs to reference that, or it needs to make sure it's answering that. And it also should be referencing changes internally and within the local area. So if you're buying in careers guidance from a different organisation, or you've got a new enterprise advisor, or you've got different links with a different external organisation, or using someone else for work experience, that's where you mention it. And it should be developed based on what works, which is really an analysis, including that destination data, which I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. So in terms of thinking about how you review your programme and what works well, so you've put a programme in place, you've talked to everybody, you've used things like the CDI framework to inform what goes on, you've used the other 7 benchmarks in order to structure your programme, then how can you think about whether it's working or not? Well, there's various ways, some of which you'll be doing already and some of which you might not be doing. So you'll be doing things like internal quality assurance, such as carrying out Compass, and you'll be analysing your destination data. But this is very much only part of the picture. Now, I know that the challenges in terms of getting the destination data for as long as it's needed, it is really quite a difficult thing. And it's a requirement that you do it, but it's only part of the picture. And if you look at a very high performing, for example, grammar school, they may look great in terms of high numbers of their students going on to what they'd call successful destinations, which is perhaps university and competitive courses. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that was the right career path for that student, or that they were appropriately supported. It means they went off to a university course because academically they were able to. And so that's why things like destination data, although it's useful, and obviously we always want to avoid and keep down the numbers of NEET students, it's only part of the picture. And actually understanding that learners are well equipped for their future life is about much more than just understanding that they got into university the following September. Things like lesson observations, this might happen anyway. PSHE might have lesson observations generally, or there might be learning walks and things happening within the school automatically. I would hope so. The best school that I saw actually named and shamed tutors in Key Stage 3 and 4 that weren't delivering careers guidance. They did a thorough audit and they specifically identified tutors who weren't doing it. Now, that's a difficult thing and a very unpopular thing to do. Teachers, as we know, are under huge amounts of pressure, but this careers content needs to be delivered, and if it's not being, there needs to be an answer. Feedback from guidance. If you're buying in guidance, or even if you've got guidance happening internally, are you ever surveying the students or informally doing little focus groups to check that the guidance is helpful and useful? The school I do guidance app does this, and it's really, really useful for the practitioner as well. If you are spending something between 2,000 and up to 30,000, large schools are spending on external careers advisors, it's crazy not to make sure that it's of a good quality. Learner questionnaires can work quite well, again, to do with guidance or to do with anything else, and parental feedback forms. You can send them out. Have you got any thoughts about what the careers programme is like? Have you got any thoughts about how we can improve careers at the school? It's unlikely you'll get many back. In my experience, schools don't get a lot of feedback back, unless, again, their careers provision is such a central key element to the vision of the school that there's complete buy-in across the parents as well. And then externally, you can be doing things like external peer review, and this is something that the Careers and Enterprise Company are going to be developing in order for schools to be able to kind of share good practice and review one another. And you've got things like the Future Skills Questionnaire, which is a much more in-depth assessment of learner understanding. And then you've got what I do, which is the Quality and Careers Standard. So an assessment process wherein an external assessor comes into the school and does a deep dive into what is working and what is not working in terms of careers. Towards the end of the session now, I just want to give a little bit of time for questions, but we just created this iconography. If you were here at the beginning of the session, you'll know that it's our Complete Careers Conference tomorrow. But we are very much, as I've said before, keen to make sure careers is good in many schools, in every school, as much as our reach will allow us. And this is a good way to think about your careers programme and think about Gatsby One in a way, because you've got the learner at the very, very centre here, and then you've got the careers programme around it. So the careers programme is what will happen to that learner, what they will be involved in, their lessons, their work experience, what posters they'll see walking down the corridor, how many guidance interviews they'll get, of what length, of what quality. This is parents' evenings and insight days and transition. This is every employer coming to talk to them. This is everything that goes on in the school. And what's that informed by? Well, it's informed by the Gatsby benchmarks, which is what we've been discussing. It's informed as well, or it should be really, by something like the CDI framework. Because whereas Gatsby's talking about what happens, what inputs are going in, what should happen, the CDI framework is much more focused on outcomes and what actually will the learners have achieved by the end of it? What will they actually be equipped for? And then in that penultimate outer layer, we've got things like Careers Impact Review System, Compass Plus, and the Future Skills Questionnaire. So that's sort of self and peer assessment. So that is sort of thinking about, all right, what is actually potentially going on that you can access for free within the systems that are already in place, using Careers and Enterprise Company, using people like Alex. And then that final line is that external validation, which you may get from organising or being involved in something like the Quality and Careers Standard. Now that's a new imagery. We've just come up with it, and it's must pay credit to the Northeast Project who came up with it, and we've modified it a little bit. But I just thought it was really useful to pop it in now and help you understand that context. Okay, so that has me come to the end of that session, and I know it's a little bit bitty, but I think the first benchmark is a little bit bitty. I think in terms of those quick wins, just to go over them finally at the end, things like making sure the language in your policy and on your website is appropriate to all people, making sure you are either emailing it out or showing it to students in assembly, that's really key as well. Making sure your programme is fed into by lots of people, that's really, really key. And some of the areas that I think are being missed and quite easy to kind of easy wins, as we say. If you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in chat or talk to me now. I'm going to hang around for the next 5 minutes or so. I'm sure Alex will as well. If not, thank you very much. Next week, we've got the Gatsby Benchmark 4 session, which is going to be careers across the curriculum. So a lot more detail about sort of winning hearts and minds in terms of careers, really making it a major part of your agenda, and also little strategies that will just help you. Thank you, it's been useful. Thanks a lot, Beth, that's good. I wasn't sure whether it was. I felt it was a little bit bitty, so I do appreciate the positive feedback. It's going to be much more detail about how you can hit that 4th benchmark. Thanks a lot, Rachel. That's great. Lovely. Any questions? No? Okay, you'll be there next week. Thanks a lot, Phil. Great. Right, do you want to... Oh, I'll stop recording now, as I have the power to do so.
Thanks, Jenny. Much appreciated.
Is that okay? I wanted to thank you. Brilliant. I wanted to